So, Mel, thank you very much for joining me this afternoon. I think I've always find it useful with these sort of sessions just to give a bit of context in terms of where the two of us first met, and I'm hoping that will give people a bit of an idea in terms of why I've asked you to join me this afternoon to talk through today's session. So I'm going to say early part of last year, you guided me through your quantum leadership program, and I'm going to be a little bit blunt. Highly disruptive experience for me, okay, and everybody else on the course. And I sort of walked into the room expecting some form of framework to be introduced to me, and actually I walked out a couple of months later with a philosophy, which was much more encompassing than I was expecting. And what really stood out to me through that experience was your ability to communicate really complex events, really complex ideas very succinctly and without giving people the comfort blanket of an example. And that forced people to figure it out themselves and play with it and put it in their own perspective. And that, my friend, is a superhuman skill. So don't underestimate that. That was genuinely really impressive.
You're hired.
So today, Mel, what I really want to do is to spend a little bit of your time talking about how your organisations can create stakeholder value. So 3 areas I like to explore. Firstly, that relationship between values and value. Secondly, how your organisation is structured to create value for your customers. And thirdly, what type of customers you want to create value with. Does that all sort of make sense for you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's quite interesting what you say there. Value and values. And if I take the first point in terms of how our organisation is structured, well, actually, that might have been the second point. One of the things that has interested me for many years is the concept of conscious capitalism, and I've followed that. Not in a purist way, and not as an ideology, but I've followed it for how it can generate a win-win and how it can generate effectiveness in terms of outcomes, both internally and externally. So I would be doing them a disservice if I didn't actually reference them in terms of talking about value and values. Our organisation is a small organisation, and when I started the organisation back in the day, coming up to 10 years ago now, I knew that I didn't want to create an organisation that was full of people, because I've always had a disconnect between being a manager of people and being a partner with a customer and being a partner with another stakeholder. I've struggled with those two concepts always. So when we first designed the organisation back in 2013, we designed an organisation that we said we would all have equal voice, not necessarily equal equity from a financial perspective, but we would all have equal voice, and that everybody's value contribution would be ethically remunerated. So we've kept to that, and the business has scaled through practitioners. The business has scaled through creating a practitioner model. Where I'm going with this is value and values. It's helping individuals, the small team that we have internally, and the growing global community to be the best that they can be doing the things that they want to do. And that really is at the heart of it for us, really. And you will know from your own quantum experience that we encourage all individuals, whether they're leaders within an organisation such as yourself or whether they're entrepreneurs, to lead with who you are first and to genuinely understand what your value contribution is, alongside purpose, which I think is something that we're going to come up and talk about in a moment. But it's really, really important, and for that to be recognised and for that to be ethically, actively recognised, right? Not just in conversation, but genuinely, actively recognised. So when you talk about structure and value and values, I think right at the very beginning, it started with my values and my purpose in life, and also my want to work purposefully. So you talk about value and values. I would also talk about purpose and being purposeful. So does that answer a little bit of the question for you?
It absolutely does. And I had a similar conversation with a lady called Brittany Harris a few weeks ago. We were looking at some of the work that she's done, and her company is relatively young. And as it's expanding, one of the things some of the tensions that she's starting to experience is, as the company grows, it's difficult to retain, I'm the founder, this is my purpose, these are my values, these are my beliefs, versus there's 50 of us in the room now. And there's something to consider about governance of that organization as to how you retain the core purpose of that. Why does this exist? Why does this exist? And maybe that's a good point for us to expand on. So at a very basic level, organizations need to meet their financial obligations, then their legal obligations, before they can start thinking about acting ethically and philanthropically. Those are the core foundations of how organizations work. So thinking about the work that you do specifically, what sort of value do you look to create, and then how do you relate it to the work that you deliver?
That's an interesting question, because what I would say to you there is that, in my experience, if you lead with purpose, you will be more profitable as a result. And I'm not saying that that's an easy thing to drive, and I'm not saying it's an easy thing to prove, because purpose by definition is something that is so nebulous. However, if the people that you work with, the people that work within your organization, and the people that work on the periphery of your organization, if they feel good and they are connected and they've got a sense of belonging, they will be the best that they can be. And if you foster and employ that, then they will be the best that they can be, which is productivity and effectiveness. And productivity and effectiveness, we know we can measure against profitability, but where true effectiveness and productivity comes from is from purpose and being purposeful. And we see that all the time. So and that your question about how, what value do we create, and how does that manifest for our customers and the people that we work with, that's really interesting, because that is what we take to each one of our customers. We take to each one of our customers a philosophy of how business and work should be, and we want to work and stay true to that philosophy and those values and principles. And if an organization doesn't, then we have a choice to progress that conversation, to progress that opportunity or not. Does that therefore restrict us from a revenue perspective and a profitability perspective? Yes, it does. However, what I would say to you in the long run is that those organizations that we do work with, that we lead with purpose, and we're creating, co-creating value, they are the organizations that stay with you longer. They are the organizations that are willing to invest in you more deeply, or indeed more broadly in other areas of the organization, to bring more value to other places. So I think in the long run, it always pays to have a zero tolerance when it comes to working in a purposeful way with purpose and the value creation that you choose to take to your customers. I really think that at the end of the day, the output of profit will be greater if you lead with purpose, and the value that you create is got to be co-created. And I think that's another thing.
Yeah, and you're sort of touching on maybe a sort of a generational transition in terms of how people engage with work, because that archetype of organizational man doesn't necessarily appeal to people entering the workforce now. People do want purpose, they do want to believe in what they're doing, and they do want to put purpose behind it. I suppose traditionally value is measured or defined in terms of utility. So how useful is this thing in satisfying your customer's want or need? And thinking that ideas like rational choice there's an assumption that everybody makes decisions to maximize their own utility. So do I want to engage with this service? How is that going to benefit me in terms of what my organization is trying to achieve? And as a service provider, that sounds great, right? That's sort of let them eat cake. Let's give them what they want and let them be gluttonous on it. But that can create a tension, presumably, between what you're trying to create for your stakeholders and what your customers value. So have you ever experienced any tension there between the value being created for your shareholders, for your stakeholders, versus the value you're creating for your customer?
I think maybe at the beginning of partnerships, at the beginning of working relationships, possibly, yes. You know, I guess it's, you don't know what you don't know, right? And I think, you know, there's a lot of an awareness piece happening here, and we don't spend enough time in anything to do with leadership and business in that awareness phase. I really, you know, I firmly believe that, personally and professionally. So when we work with organizations, oftentimes there is a tension there, David, especially when, you know, you're talking about, you know, the savings that we need to make, or the profit that we need to make, or these targets that we need to meet, or, you know, and these goals and these milestones that we've set in stone. But really, they are all constructs of legacy choice, which means that today, if we can build an awareness and say, do you need that? Where did that come from? Is that necessary? Is that the best? Is that the best option? To raise curiosity and to build questions that help people shift from the stuff that I need to do just because I need to do it, to the what's more purposeful and what's right as opposed to the right thing, is really important. So whilst there's always a tension there in some way, shape or form, small or large, I think one of the things that we do try and do right at the very beginning is to raise awareness and to get people to start questioning things that they wouldn't necessarily question previously, and to help them to understand that there might be a different way, and there is, you know, that there is a choice that we all have. There's so many of us that are bound by the legacy of process steps, and, you know, we've done this because we've always done it. And I hark back to a conference that I spoke at many years ago, and we went into breakout conversations, and I was at a table with some people from the public sector, and it was very interesting that one lady had said that just 2 weeks previously, a new CIO, Chief Information Officer, had started working with the organisation, and the first thing that he did was he went out with a process amnesty. And he said, if there is something that you do, or a way that you are doing something that you feel is not true to you, not the best way of doing it for the organisation and what we're trying to achieve with the organisation, then email this email box, send it to this email box. He had to get a business analyst, by the way, in to sift through the data. But the key thing was that the majority of things, the majority of rules that people were bound by, the false beliefs, the false purpose, they were I think up to about 75% of them, they were legacies that were just drawn up by old managers back from 10, 20 years ago, and they were not part of formal organizational corporate governance or structure, right? So strip it back to first principles, and all of a sudden we realize that there's a lot more maneuverability.
That's one of the things I've always liked about lean thinking. You know, it's if this doesn't add value to the end product, the end service, strip it out. It doesn't need to be there, and that requires a constant level of background assessment and awareness of what we're doing. Is it still relevant? Is it still relevant? Is it still relevant? And working in the sort of highway industry at the moment, you know, we've seen massive shifts in transport behaviour and people's travel behaviour, and arguably how you look after your highway network now, or rather how your customers want to access it, is fundamentally different, even over a 24-month period. So scale that over 10 years of a business cycle, then yeah, you do need to make the time to look in the mirror on a regular basis to assess these things. Okay, so let's push this a little bit further. And so when we're thinking about co-creating value with these potential customers, so you completed your SWOT analysis, you know, a traditional linear model would say that your organization has the competencies, they have the resources, they create the value, and your customers are purely a recipient of that value. Is that how it works? Is that your experience?
No, that's not how we work. And again, to your earlier conversation, is that the expectation that customers and partners and suppliers bring to us? More often than not, yes. But I'm very, very pleased to say that is changing. For us, co-design, co-creation, community is really where it's all at, and every single one of our customers knows that there is nothing that we as an organization do that is off the shelf. Even to the point of our public programs, every single one of our public programs, each individual has a unique experience, so that everybody is seen as uniquely individual and given a human profile rather than a label. So the ability to engage in and design a relationship that is a true community extension of who we are and who the organization is really important to us. And the organization that you work with, I don't know whether we are able to mention names on these recordings or not, but we can, Dorset. So, working with Dorset Council, for us, it is absolutely about a community relationship. There isn't anything that we wouldn't help Dorset Council with. And now I would expect that a large majority of people that we've worked with at Dorset Council would do anything that they could to help us in terms of driving value, living values, being purposeful, and delivering on purpose. And that's what you get, right? That for me is, wow, how lucky am I to be living and breathing and working in the role that I've got.
So I'm going to change my language here to mirror you. If you're in the room here with partners, arguably trying to create a solution to a problem,
yeah,
maybe the key here is sort of challenging the social construct so that customers see that actually they have some of the knowledge and skills to help produce this value as well. It's not purely an expectation on the consultant to do this for them. So have you got any thoughts on how you can create an environment where that can happen?
Yeah, I mean, so thoughts on how we can make that happen. I think we do make it happen because, with everything that we've already talked about, if you are genuinely having human to human conversations, if there is clarity and alignment of value and values, and clarity and alignment of purpose and what it means to work in a purposeful way, I think you're there. So it just kind of happens. It just becomes natural, as it would when you're down the pub on a Friday night having a drink with your mates. It becomes human natural.
But it's natural for you because that's the mindset you're approaching the relationship with.
Yep.
But I'm just sort of thinking that some of the clients you presumably work with, some of the partners, they may be coming this more from a service provider. Mel, yep, here's a problem, give me a solution to it.
Yep.
I don't want a relationship, I want a transaction. So have you got any thoughts on how you can sort of change that construct for your clients to help them come to the table with you? So you're both walking into the room with trust. You're both looking to contribute.
Yeah. I would say there's several things that you can do to support that. There's a couple of customers that we're working with at the moment, and we know it's going to be a journey. So I think the first thing to say, which is a wee bit of a caveat, is it doesn't happen overnight. We do very much have a few customers that we're working with at the moment that are, for all the right reasons within their current reality, really restricted by the system and the conditions and the environment within which they operate, which doesn't lend itself to a community way of working with us. So their expectation is, when are you delivering? What are you going to deliver? So, if your question is, what are we doing about that? Then what we're doing about that is on different levels. So the first thing that we're doing is building a relationship around what is open and honest, and building awareness. We are doing a lot of stakeholder orientation with this customer. We also allow all of our customers for no additional cost to their budget to engage within our value set and our framework and our training. And we do that with every single one of our customers. And the customers that take that up are the customers that then have a voice, and and it's a tipping point. So stakeholder management, stakeholder orientation workshops, that happens anyway. And I think a lot of organizations do that. I mean, and any consultant would be here in front of you, David, saying that's exactly what they do. What is this woman talking about? There's nothing special in there. But when you're doing it from a purposeful perspective and you're doing it from a baseline of value and trust, it is a little bit different. But notwithstanding, that's that. But then allowing our doors to be open to our customers and allowing our customers to come in at nobody's expense other than our time, in order for them to truly see what this is all about, is really important. I think really important. And just allowing people within an organization to recognize that that not all suppliers have got a transactional mindset, that we've got a trust mindset rather than a transactional mindset. That I think that's really important. So it does take time. I think something else that you talked about earlier on, a lot of customers come to us with pain points. And what we try and do right at the very start is shift the language and try and get them to talk about their gifts and their value points as opposed to their pain points. So shifting the language is another subtle way. The power of communication, it is how we manifest who we are and our beliefs. The power of word and the power of communication and conversation is not to be underestimated. You think about an inspiring leader that or somebody that you look up to and you respect. I bet your bottom dollar there's something about the words that they use. There's something about the way that they communicate that is the inspirational thing that drives trust, that drives that motivation for you to follow them. And I think that's really, really super important too.
I mean, that is the human element at its essence, isn't it? You're not necessarily wanting a relationship with an organization. It's Mel. There's something there, and if it's not today, it's tomorrow. There's something here which draws you together. Taking a quick look at your website, one of the things that stood out to me is the sort of diversity of organizations which you engage with. And having spent a little bit of time on either side of the table in terms of public and private sector, I'm interested on your perspective here as to whether you see a difference between your partners' willingness to come to the table as well, for them to invest in the co-creation process. So do you see any difference there between the public and private sector?
Yeah, I think there is more of a willingness to enter into that community and that co-design relationship in the public sector. I don't know what drives that, David. It might be that there's a mindset that says that the public sector is lagging behind a little bit in terms of innovation and access to new shiny things, and maybe the people within those organizations are, when somebody comes along and feels a little bit new and shiny, they latch on. I don't know whether that there's some of that mindset going on. I wouldn't know, and I'm not au fait with any of the statistics or the research around that, but I would say that it is easier and quicker to for us in our experience to enter into that co-design, that community relationship. It's not that it doesn't happen with our private sector customers, but what I would say is that the private sector customers, when we are able to ditch the who's in the room by label, the financial controller, the CEO, and the chief marketing officer, when we're able to ditch the labels and the human beings are in the room, then it gathers speed. I think there's more of that, I think, at play.
Absolutely agree with that last statement. It's getting people to come into the group and not identify as their job title or their rank, their position in the hierarchy. And once you get detached from yourself from that, everybody's comfortable in contributing. And maybe spending some time working with the team this morning, looking at the insights discovery model. Actually, maybe there within the public sector, there is a greater recognition of empathy, of patience, of quality of care. Those are energies which are more common within public sector organisations. So it may be that they're more willing to recognise this is a long-term relationship rather than what impacts this going to have on my quarterly returns.
Yeah, I mean, the world is changing, right? And COVID has been a huge accelerant, and we have got generational diversity. You mentioned yourself earlier on, we're talking about generational values, and activism in terms of, walking with your feet if an organisation isn't displaying their values and living their values. That aside, I do think that at the end of the day, the amount of people that enter into public service from a vocational and a purposeful place versus private sector, there is a displacement there. But the good news, I think, is that things are moving and things are changing. And you hear stories in people having passion projects in the private sector, and I think now more than ever, and we're seeing this in terms of trends. This attention economy, the Great Resignation, the hybrid, complexity, and also things like regeneration and sustainability. These subjects are not singular they're not siloed. They are all incredibly interrelated. They're all part of the same big whole. And as in WHOLE. And I think that the beauty of that is that we are starting to recognise ourselves as systems and less as departments and less as profit and loss spreadsheets and less as transactions and functions. We're starting to see ourselves more and more as whole systems that are systems that don't have a hard bricks and mortar boundary that delineates you from the outside world or your personal life. Every boundary now is starting to break down, and I think that is brilliant. I think that is a really good thing. What we need to do is harness it. What we need to be is aware of it. What we need is people that are willing to trust first and step forward.
I tell you what, that feels like a nice point to bring us to a close now. That was a nice conclusion. Thank you. So genuinely really grateful for your time today. There's an awful lot there to sort of unpick, and I'm really positive that people will have something which they can sort of weave into their own practice, and hopefully in the days and weeks that come. So Mel, once more, thanks for your time. Really appreciate that.
No problem. Thanks, David. Thank you.